Right, so what I'm going to do is share this whiteboard, and if you hold on 1 second, all you're going to look at for the time being is an empty whiteboard, and there we have it. So what I'm going to use this whiteboard for in a moment is some very amateurish drawing, but as I said, this is setting the scene for the way I work one-to-one with clients, in explaining, in using lots of metaphor, lots of storytelling, how the brain works. So we're not diving deep into neuroscience, and there'll be no jargon, but making sense of what goes on in our minds when it comes to particularly chronic stress overload, and how that wraps in with menopause and, you know, puts it on steroids pretty much. So bear with me a second, because I have used this before, but it might be a little bit clunky. So if we think about stress, we think of obvious things like, you know, we can kind of all relate to this. That makes sense that if we have a busy job, if we have lots of responsibilities, we will be stressed. But actually, stress, help if I could type there, wouldn't it? Is a physical response to emotion. Okay, so what we commonly think, what I'm saying here in relation to the way the brain works, is that this is not the case. Stress is a physical response to emotion. And we know that when we get stressed and emotional, what happens is we have raised heart rate. Oh, hello. Let's use drawing. Ignore that. My rubbish writing. So we get raised heart rate, we get raised sweat production, we get reduced digestion, which I'm not going to type in because it's too long. So increased heart rate, increased sweat production, reduced digestion. Those are the key elements. I'm not going to bring in the chemicals yet. I will mention in a moment. I just want to focus on one key chemical. But that's fundamentally it. That's how our body responds to emotion and defines it as stress. So something I know that many of you will be familiar with is the notion of a stress bucket. Some of you will have no idea what I'm talking about, and others will. I just want to clear some space so I can draw my buckets. Before I draw my bucket, I actually do have, you'll see the screen. Here is my stress bucket, loaded up with lots of nice stress balls. So when we think about this bucket, let's draw a nice bucket. So here's our lovely bucket. Oops, a bit wobbly, has a bit of a stretchy bottom, top. We know that what goes in here is stress, because it's called a stress bucket, and this is perfectly normal. This is what happens. We use this stress bucket for stress, but it has a finite capacity. So if we fill it up to there, we're fine. But if we start to try to put more in, we're in trouble. But let's understand first how that bucket gets emptied in the relationship with sleep. This is really the most fundamental thing to understand. Not any old sleep, but REM sleep. And that's obviously becomes clear. So with my bucket, when I'm clearing it out with REM, this is going to be interesting. This is my little, here's my tap. So REM, if you like, is the tap on the edge of the stress bucket, which means that we can drain out that stress every evening when we go to sleep. So that's the deal. That is how we fundamentally maintain this balance when we are in balance and when we are coping and when life is going really well. It's through the stress bucket, which I have here, and it has all the stress balls in it. And as long as we go to sleep, we have good REM sleep, we will empty that out and we will retain balance. But here's the important bit, serotonin. So I'm just going to come out of the whiteboard for a moment, because my typing is too slow. So serotonin is our key chemical that we're looking for in our brain that creates calm and reduces stress. And what we know is that when we're stressed, we stop producing quite as much serotonin. We also know that under menopause, our serotonin production is also impaired by the shift in hormonal imbalance. So we have just let someone into the room. So we have two key categories going on here. We have reduced serotonin production simply because of menopause. And if we also have chronic stress overload, we have reduced serotonin production because of that. Morning, Jackie. I'm just talking through stress buckets. So if we have too much stress, what we end up with is reduced serotonin, impaired sleep, and therefore we're not creating as much REM to empty out that stress and enable us to create our own serotonin. We get unresolved surplus. When we get unresolved surplus, what we see are the symptoms of things like anxiety, what we will call stress, which we know is a physical thing, anger, irritation, frustration, depression, upset. These are the modern variations of the classic fight or flight response mechanism. So we know, well, that's all very nice. So we have a bucket, we fill it with stress. As long as we empty it through REM, we produce serotonin, we remain calm, and that's what enables us to cope and feel like we can concentrate and be motivated and take on the world. So I really am only focusing on serotonin. There are other chemicals too, but this is the most important one from the point of view of what we're doing here. So if we overload stress, which can be the fact that if we're not producing enough serotonin, we automatically feel less able to cope because we don't have that happy, calm, coping chemical. And when we feel less able to cope, that means we create more of that physical stress. Our heart rate will rise more readily. The sweat production will increase more readily. So we already have this inbuilt mechanism. If everything else was fine and then we hit menopause, we start creating more stress because we have less serotonin. Now, if we also create stress in other ways, remembering this is physical, so stress comes in the tiniest little packets. You know, my little stress balls here. It could be anything from not waking up in time when the alarm goes off, or forgetting a hair appointment that we had, or missing the last post. You know, the tiniest things are stresses, and none of those matter unless we start overloading those buckets. I'm just going to go back to my beautiful whiteboard drawing, which, isn't that lovely? This is my bucket, everybody. So as we start to create more stress, what happens is we start overloading. And instead of being able to empty the stress out of this tap here, which is our REM sleep, what happens is it just starts overflowing. And there's nowhere for it to go, it just overflows. When we get overflowing stress, that's when we really begin to find we're in trouble, because it means that this REM sleep, which is meant to empty the bucket through this tap, can't clear all of it. It will only clear what's in the bucket. So where does the rest go? Well, the truth is it doesn't go anywhere. During that REM sleep, what happens in the brain is it's moving short-term emotional memory, it makes me feel into longer-term narrative memory, which means in the morning, ideally, I wake up, I feel amazing, I can take on the world and do whatever I want. I'm superhuman, I'm brilliant. When we move into this space of overloaded stress, that comes through reduced levels of serotonin, that comes through a myriad of tiny things, big things, doesn't really matter. We create too much, we get this overflow, we get unresolved surplus, and then this is like compound interest. So my brain during this REM sleep works really hard to try and empty it, but it can't deal with this surplus. So what it does, if you imagine, you wake up the next morning, remember this is just one day, you wake up the next morning and this unresolved surplus gets put into the bucket. So we start the day off with things in the bucket. Which means when we wake up, we're not feeling quite as good as we could. We're feeling a little bit bleh. We all know that feeling. It doesn't have to take over our lives, but it's a familiar feeling. Now, if all was great and we had a really quiet day, we was putting stress in our bucket, but we only fill it, say, up to here, we still haven't overfilled it, then we will get back into balance through this REM sleep that moves emotional memory, which is stress, because it's a physical response, into longer term memory, where I can just talk about it and I don't feel anything. But we all know when we combine something like menopause, we have reduced serotonin levels. So we're already more, or rather less well disposed to dealing with stress. But we just are. And then we have life, and life is pouring things into this bucket. And it doesn't matter whether these are a myriad, like millions and millions of small things, like my bucket here with loads of balls in it, or a few big things, like the death of a mother, a parent going into care, or a combination of the above. But imagine we don't just have one day where this is overloaded, this stuff pouring out the side and as also happens. We have many, many days, and they go on and on and on. There's more days and more days and more days. It's like there's no end to it. And so what can happen is the norm becomes filling. We're running, from the moment we wake, our bucket is up here. And I'm deliberately drawing kind of mad lines, partly because I can't draw very well. But also, it does create that manic, which means there's no space left for the new stuff to come in. So we are running each day kind of on fumes and fresh air. We cannot cope as well. And the evidence for that, should we need any, and none of us do, is when we start to focus way more on what's in the past or what's in the future, but not in a good way. So we worry about the future. We worry that we won't cope tomorrow. We worry that we won't be able to think as clearly as we normally do. And we worry we won't meet that deadline. We worry that people won't like us. We worry that it could all go horribly wrong. We worry that we'll never be able to do the things we want to do, that we'll never figure this thing out. And that thought process, so these are just thoughts. Now we're not only not emptying the bucket, we are putting more in. This is becoming a very messy bucket. And that more stuff going in is thoughts about stuff, not real things, just thoughts about things. So this is when thoughts become things. This is really, really important to understand. Thoughts become things. Thoughts are real things that go in this bucket. And the reason they're real things is because, remember this definition of stress up here. Stress is a physical response to emotion, and thoughts create emotion. So I don't need to give any of you any help, but you just have to think about something that's made you feel bad yesterday or today. I had a very quick chat right at the beginning of this, and we look at the weather outside and it's raining. So it's raining, so what? Your logical brain might say, but if that rain causes you to feel, that's a physical response. Now, at a low level, doesn't matter, but remember, we've already overloaded with all kinds of stuff. So a small thing like that, just a thought about the weather, and we turn it into things we can't do, things we'd like to do, things, whatever it is, that all those are thoughts that become real and overload that bucket, which means there is no space in this bucket. It is full to overflowing. It's chaotic, it's messy, there's stuff spilling everywhere. It's just like this tap is just not big enough. It cannot remove as much as we're putting into it. And that's when we feel this overwhelm, we feel this loss of concentration, we feel like we can't cope, we lose confidence and belief in ourselves because of this process falling apart. And it starts, with this little chemical called serotonin, which is why many of us don't really experience this chaos until we get to menopause. Because up to that point, we have some good mechanisms. I often find this with the kind of people I work with, and I certainly would apply this to myself, that I was one of those coping people. I had a very capacious bucket, a really big bucket. And I thought, hey, I can cope with anything, throw it at me, just send it this way, I can deal with it. But then we hit menopause and we have impaired serotonin production, so happy calm chemical, then that potentially leads us into difficulty. And you add in all the other stuff and then the thoughts. So it's all completely chaotic. So there's our lovely whiteboard. So how do we get out of this? That's what we're all here for, is how do we get out of this? Understanding that that's what it's doing is a start. I mean, just understanding what's going on in terms of chemical production, in terms of thoughts, in terms of what stress really is. It's not about busy jobs, responsibility. It's about how we feel. But the good news is, I was going to draw you another picture, but I don't think we can bear another picture. Brains love, in fact, let me pause for a second, because I know some of you just jumped in and seen this and might be thinking, whoa, where are we? So based on what you've heard, I know you've missed the beginning, but based on what you've heard, does that make sense, or do you want some more clarity, or is it all, oh yeah, I knew all that? Hello.
Hello. I think I knew most of it, but it's interesting. I wasn't aware of the serotonin thing, so I think that's interesting to as a thing. Okay, where do we get more serotonin from? And also, yeah, I knew sleep was obviously vital, but the actual mechanism of the REM helping us deal with or get rid of the stress so that we can start again the next day is interesting. So
yeah, good.
It was kind of a good reminder, really. And that, yeah, the thing that stress is not the kind of the list of things that you can say these are the reasons why I'm stressed, but the actual emotional stuff is again a good reminder to be pointed out.
Yeah, I think, thank you for that, because I think it's really important, because so much of this is kind of in common sense, common knowledge. We understand that when we sleep we feel better, like a good night's sleep. This has come up more than once. We know we get a good night's sleep, we feel great, yay, how amazing is that? But understanding why we feel good when we have a good night's sleep, that our brains are really busy, and it's one of the reasons REM sleep is only in short bursts. So you will not get constant REM sleep through the night, because your brain suddenly goes kabam, like every light is on. It's full on busy. If you imagine every hand on deck trying to empty this bucket full of stress, so that you can wake up in the morning feeling lovely. And we know that it uses vast amounts of energy, so we can't have too much of it. We have to have finite amounts, and then we have that different wave pattern of sleep where we are just resting and renewing and restoring and re-energizing. So good. So the trick is, how do we realize what's going on with stress, but let's look at how brains work to get us out of this, but also how they maintain it. This is the same thing. So brains love repetition. Teachers are, I write a book on stuff. Teachers don't really like to be creative about how we learn. We talk about learning styles and this, that, and the other. But the truth is, brains love repetition. Just keep repeating a thought pattern or an activity, and you repeat it long enough, your brain will start, before it's even become a pattern, it starts seeking out connections. So you start kind of telling it, here's this thing I think, or I'm doing, or I want, and it starts off a single thought, or a single feeling, or a single thing you do. But your brain wants to help you out. It's programmed, it works in such a way that it is driven to strengthen your resources, to create more and more shortcuts for you, so you don't have to work so hard at stuff. So it has good intention. If you think about when we're children, that obviously the quicker we can learn how all these limbs work together, the easier it will be to walk and to pick things up and all of that stuff. So that's the natural way the brain works. Neuroplasticity has kind of transformed everything in terms of how we understand the possibilities and the potential for change. So just sticking with repetition for a moment and understanding what the brain does with that, using the example that some of you may or may not be familiar with of London cab drivers. We're all of an age that we know London cab drivers certainly used to do the knowledge. What they do now, I have no idea. But they used to do the knowledge before sat-nav. If you wanted to be a London cab driver, you went out for several years on your little moped, or you walked the streets of London through all of the milestones, the hotels, the whatevers, so that you would learn every single back street. And what happened was you created repetition for your brain that realized through the repetition that it needed to hold on to this, to seek out confirmation, to create and strengthen pathways. So when you get London cab drivers who have done the knowledge and you set them up on a brain scan, you will see that the part of their brain which manages spatial awareness is enlarged. It is bigger than mine is, because I have no spatial awareness, certainly. It's bigger than most of us. And it remains enlarged for the duration of the time that they are cab drivers. When they retire and they don't have to do it anymore, that part of the brain will just shrink back to what it was, to deal with normal life. The brain will divert resources where it thinks you want them. So when we're under stress and we've got buckets overflowing all over the place, we've got sleep impairment, we're not producing enough serotonin. In fact, we're probably producing adrenaline and cortisol instead, which we know is not great. The brain will still interpret all of those thoughts and all of those things we're doing as something it needs to find more connections for. It takes it as an instruction. It's like, oh, well, we seem to keep repeating this, so let's go and find some more connections that remind me and strengthen the pathways that we've created. So it creates and compounds the problem. So if we worry about, standing up and doing a presentation in a group, for example, and lots of people are really, really uncomfortable with that. It doesn't matter what level you're at in business, whether you're managing director, because I've worked with them, or not, many people are afraid of stuff like that. So the brain goes, oh, okay, so we need to be afraid of this, and it will seek out more and more connections that relate to that discomfort, that fear, if you like, of that thing, that provides more evidence of the fact that this thing is true. This is a true thing. And it confirms what it's found, because it's found more of it. And then it feeds back and strengthens more connections. So we end up with this loop of negativity, reinforcing negativity and strengthening pathways. So I'm sure you've all seen this. You see pictures of brain scans and neurons where these kind of chaotic diagrams and little pockets of wiggly things, which are the neurons, and all of the connections between them are synaptic connections, synapses. And each time we give the brain a bit of information, it will fire off a neuron. And that neuron is basically sending off a message saying, hey, anyone out there like me? And other neurons will receive that message through synaptic connections. Now, if this is something we think a lot, we have a powerful pathway and we have networks. We've made them strong. So when we're in menopause, we're overloaded with stress, we've strengthened all the things that don't work for us, the things that make us feel bad. And so those pathways are nice and strong, which means there's a quick response to neuron, 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 neuron. And then the links between them become more embedded. So we have more powerful links and more powerful networks. So just like in the taxi driver's brain, we're strengthening certain parts of our brain that relate to fear and anxiety. We could talk about hippocampus and hypothalamus and amygdalas, but we're not going to. I want you to stick with the metaphor of, you imagine this is a tree, really, a tree with branches all over and little fruits that are the neurons, and they're sending out little messages to all the others. Maybe Christmas tree lights is a better analogy. So that's how it works. So in what we're doing here, in very simple terms, is starting to send out new messages, create new repetition, to build or enable your brain to do what it does naturally, which is seek out more connections, seek out more evidence that confirm that what it's sought out in the first place is actually valid and true. To the extent that we start to allow those old pathways that aren't serving us, they're just making us feel rubbish, they're just making us feel uncomfortable doing presentations, or feeling like we can't really cope with this workload that we used to cope with, or wondering what our purpose is. We want those to just kind of wither away. Like, you're not important, I don't really need you, thanks. It was great, but you can go now. And we start, so to begin with, it's slow. It is like building a new muscle. To begin with, it's like, oh, that hurts, really? But we want to strengthen it. The brain works and it loves repetition. So we keep repeating the good stuff, which is why in this program, I ask you every week to say, what's been good this week? And we'll develop that. So that's just one pathway. But if you like, that's our first neuron. That's our first neuron going, what's been good? We want it to kind of pulse like those old Belisha beacons, which we don't seem to have anymore. Little pulse, just set that off. And it's sending a message out across the brain through kind of withered away pathways. They're there, but they're a little bit weak, haven't been used a lot recently, and they need a bit of clearing away of the undergrowth. But it's sending out a little gentle, to begin with, a very weak pulse, just gently going, anyone there? Anyone there? Really quiet. And because it's quiet, a little bit weak, and the undergrowth, you know, it to begin with, it's just like, oh yeah, there's one here. It's all sort of a bit quiet. But as we keep doing it, remember the repetition is vital. We keep doing what's been good, what's working. And there are other tools that I'll give you as we move through this. But this is all I want us to focus on today, is repetition, focus on the good stuff, the good moments. Because the more we do that, the more the brain goes, oh, hang on a minute, and it clears away the pathways, and we get a few more pulsing neurons becoming a little bit stronger, sending out messages and beginning to strengthen those pathways, make those synaptic connections, so that they're connecting more and more of these neurons and beginning to create neural networks from single pathways, more and more of them. As we do that, then we shift the balance. And to go back to the buckets that we looked at earlier, what this has the impact of doing is beginning to enable us to produce serotonin. Thoughts are things, remember, and these positive thoughts we're repeating and repeating, strengthening neural pathways, creating fresh neural networks that work for us, stimulate the production of serotonin, which is our calm coping chemical. And the more calm we feel, we know, the more we can think straight, which means the brain fog clears, the more we can focus, the more we can come up with solutions that work for us. So it's not about do this, do that, do the other. We want to find our own individual pathways. This is the way through. So as we improve that serotonin, that bucket starts to empty itself. It supports us. And we clear that unresolved surplus, and then REM can start to become powerful and effective again. It says, oh, thank God. Thank God there's not so much in that bucket now. So that's our job in these, not just in these early weeks, but moving forwards in, you know, from the end of this program, through this program, and then beyond it, in everything we do. We want to come back to, at any point we start to notice, you know, we've begun to creep into negative thinking, worrying about the past, worrying about the future, feeling lost, feeling confused. We know we started to stray. So the route back on what, this is why I want this to be so powerful at the core of what we do. The route back is just start by noticing the tiny things that work to help stimulate those neurons, those pathways, that serotonin production, the emptying of that bucket, and get the whole brain on board. And that's when the magic starts to happen. So I'm going to stop talking, and if you want to put your video on, do, or if you don't, it doesn't matter. You can just put on sound, it's fine. If you'd rather just, you know, you could be in bed in your pajamas for all I care. Yes, this is your place, your space. But does that give clarity, or have I just gone whoosh? Is everybody just now confused? Yeah? Clarity. Oh, good. I've got one video and someone's nodding. Yay. There is actually a chat room. If those of you that don't even want to put on your audio, you could, let's open the chat room. Just, you know, just share. Has that helped? Does it not help? Does it mean this makes more sense? Or did you go, oh yeah, I knew that. I knew that's what we were doing.
I think, oh, sorry, about someone else talking.
No, it's me. Carry on.
Firstly, to say I'm so sorry I was late. I was plugging in the numbers for about 10, 11, 12 times, and just kept saying invalid number. And finally, it let me in. So I'm so sorry. I've been trying since just about 10 o'clock.
No, don't be sorry, Sue. Fine.
But yeah, no, that I'm quite familiar with all of this, and it's totally makes sense. I think the interesting bit is actually when you're familiar with it yourself or using it in a job, you don't apply it. You don't stop and think about, what am I saying here? What do you actually have to put into practice?
Yeah.
So it's quite good to really stop and think again. Think, actually, do it yourself. Start again, go back to basics, notice little things, and make yourself put this into practice.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because I think that's what I found. And you don't hear yourself. You know, when you're with clients, for those of us that have done this kind of work, you can hear, it's like sticking a big red nose, you know, on the end of your nose. It's so obvious when someone, you can see them losing themselves in a sea of negativity.
Yeah.
And you're gently steering. Now let's focus on this thing that works. Let's focus on this thing that's good. And that's what you see it. But when it's you don't hear it. It's like la 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 la. I can't hear you. Can't see you.
I think it's remembering too. For me, it's actually, you know, days are so busy, life is so busy, that actually remembering to spend a bit of time actively engaging in, you know, what's good, what works. It's actually remembering to do it rather than get caught up in the flow of every day and just getting on with stuff.
Yeah. So you probably do this too, but that's the first step. So this is all small steps. The very first step is just creating what I call a little gap in the doorway. If you imagine like the salesman on your doorstep. Mm-hmm. But in this case, it's someone you want to come in, and it creates that little change, like that. Like the foot in the door is simply awareness of doing it. Mm. You don't have to, like right at the beginning, you don't have to do anything with it, but just when you start to increase your awareness of, oh God, did I just do that again? Was I just all consumed with the drama of life and things going wrong? Did I do that? Pause is the first step, because then you've created enough of a little space, a little gap, that you can start to leave it open and step into and start to really work with. And when you have that awareness in the day, when you create it, it is about, you know, like right now we're all blissfully engaged with this, I'm delighted to say. So we're, you know, our brains are all thinking and doing, but right in this moment, if you just paused, it doesn't mean you have to go and do anything different. Just allow your thoughts or your senses to be alert to niceness around you. That might be just the feeling that this is a gift you give to yourself. This time might be that. You know, I'm looking around at my desk, and, you know, I've got a picture of my mum smiling, which is really nice. I've got a lovely little, I love this. It's like a shaky. Isn't that lovely? Oh, love that. I've got some nice tactile things. just allowing your senses. So even if you're in a meeting, you know, if you're in work and it's busy and it's frantic, it's hectic, and you're trying to think, I've got to concentrate, got to focus, got to be on it, got to be the person in charge, you know, whatever it is that we tell ourselves when we're in work, you can still create a little pause in your mind, because no one can see in, it's only you that's in there, and just think, what is there in this moment that I could tap into? And it could be in that room or it could be somewhere else. But that's, yeah, it's all stuff you know, isn't it?
It's good
to have a reminder.
Yeah. And I think often people confuse, so again, to go back to cliches and common sense and stuff we know, often people think, oh, this is about gratitude, or gratitude is a nice way of tapping into this. And it is. But I think sometimes with gratitude, what we do is it's all a bit shallow. We don't dive deep enough. It's not fully connected to us. And the reason I like to talk about the way the brain works and start off with that emotional thing and that thoughts are things, it's moving that into, it's a physical thing of about sensory input, sensory information. So if I want to extend gratitude and use that as my tool for noticing the good stuff, it needs to move beyond, I'm really grateful for, you know, the lovely people in my life and the fact that I have good health. You know, you can do all of that. That's all good stuff. But you want to physically feel it. You want to dive into that and really, you know, often we need to close our eyes and go, what does that feel like to appreciate that? How do I feel it? Because that gives your brain more information, because the brain loves, I didn't talk so much about that, but it learns best from sensory inputs.
Actually, I think that's a really good point, because it is quite, I've found it quite easy. I was just thinking, does it involve times when you look at your husband and think, God, you're driving me bloody crazy? And then you might try and think, okay, focus on something else, or, you know, think of what he has done. But actually, in that moment, you just think, no, you're just driving me crazy. But it's feeling it. I think it's finding little things and not just saying the words, like you just said, feeling what that means to you and what that feels like, rather than just words. Because I could get caught up in just using words rather than, that's quite good.
Good. And I think where you get caught up in words now, that's the awareness is just of the external expression of stuff. But obviously, because this has been building, you know, it didn't just start out feeling like this. One day you woke up and it was, oh my God, what happened? It's like, it kind of creeps up on you, really, doesn't it? Like you're coping. Oh, you're not coping quite so well. You're not coping quite, oh hello, what happened here? And so those words that you use now they do connect to feelings. It's just what you notice now as you hear the words. But you know, if I let you, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to. If I said, oh, tell me, how bad is it? How much does he annoy you? And you started using the words, yeah, they quickly connect to the feeling, don't they? And so, yes, to find the route into this new pathway, you have to go for the feeling first, that eventually starts reconnecting to words, and then you go, oh God, that's so amazing when you do that. I love the way you planted that rose bush, if we call it the garden.
I think we're way off that one. Yeah, I'll start with the pebbles.
Yes.
No, you're right. That's really interesting, actually, thinking about connecting the feelings of something rather than just the words.
Yeah, it's the most powerful shift. And people think they can't do that because you get so consumed with how awful you feel, or how angry you feel, or how confused you feel, that you think you can't do that other stuff. But then if you just tap into the old memory banks, just tap into them. Or tap into some future thing that you're really looking forward to, or something you've done, and just close your eyes for a moment and take yourself there. And it has to be really personal to you, which is why that whole, just find yourself in a lovely garden. That's someone else's version. You find your version of, oh, let me think of a time when I just feel alive, motivated, on fire. That person exists. She's still in there. So you find an example, a memory, a moment, and you go, okay. And you close your eyes and you go back there and you just keep diving in deeper and deeper to that moment. In fact, we could do that now, couldn't we? Why don't we do that now? Let's have a bit of fun. So, none of you have to tell me what you're thinking about. This is not important. But what I want you all to do is find an example in your experience of, it could be a moment, it could be a person, it could be a thing, a place. But an experience is usually best, an experience. So it might be a meal you shared, or a beach you stood on, or a conversation you had, or a bird you heard. Just find something in your experience. When you were there or when you imagine being there, it was good. So close your eyes and dive into that. And really immerse yourself in it. Begin to allow your senses to open up to what it is you're thinking of. Dive deeper into this in a way you may not normally notice. Become more aware of all of the tiny details, of things you can see, maybe things you can hear. Maybe there's a sense of taste or aroma, a physical sensation of the space and the place that you're in. Allow yourself in this moment to picture yourself as if you're there. To capture this moment so fully and so completely that with your eyes closed, you transport yourself to a different moment, a different time. But you place yourself in it. No longer just a random thought, but a feeling, an observation of everything in this moment. Feel into it. And as you feel into it so completely, that in a few moments, not yet, but in a few moments, when you open your eyes, you will almost be surprised not to be there. Just swim in this sensation. Breathe it in, experience it, enjoy it. Notice new aspects of it, with your senses on high alert to the joy or the pleasure, the calm or the excitement, whatever it is that makes this moment pleasurable or joyous or uplifting or motivational or whatever it is to you. And when you've captured it so completely that you do feel like you could almost be there in this moment, then open your eyes. So I'm hoping that you're all feeling quite nice now.
Yeah, I want to stay. I would have liked to have stayed there.
Yeah. If you think of that as a tool that you can use, you know, meditation's lovely and yoga's lovely and walking's lovely and all those things support you, but this is another tool that you actually have and you take it with you everywhere you go, and you've just proved to yourself that you can access it. So, and it doesn't take long. I mean, I kind of laboured it a little bit, but really it probably took you about 30 seconds to a minute to get into that feeling. And so it's something you can use any way you choose. You can use it as a meditation, if you like, if that's something you enjoy doing. You could use it when the whole world appears to be going, and you think, oh my goodness, I just need to get myself out of this tense, the shoulders up kind of angst, and just quietly step into this, because it will help stimulate that brain, because it will start looking for, even though you don't realize it, the very act of doing this says to your brain, go look for more stuff like this. And the more we repeat it, the more it finds. And then you start to discover, then the moments pop, and little solutions. That's when the real magic happens. Little solutions to thorny problems that have been bugging you for ages start to suddenly appear. You go, oh, I didn't think of that before. And that's the power of this. Does anyone else want to add anything?
I think it's been really helpful, Shirley. Thank you. I did have to bow out for a short while. Unfortunately, I had an emergency call come through, but it's okay. I've managed to sort it on the phone. And part of the nature of the job I do. It's refreshing to actually understand, as one of the ladies was saying earlier, to actually get those senses working, and actually it's going back to recalling from the brain, you know, the sights, the smells, all those other sorts of things, rather than the words. Because I feel I'm almost had to, over many years, be very careful what words that I'm using, not to offend or, you know, be misconstrued in any way. So my brain automatically goes to those, actually the words, to make sure they're the right words. But for certainly on the personal side, with the menopause and everything else, actually getting back to those senses and is actually fantastic. And I think what I'll do is I'll put a little note on my wall to remind me, because it's a little nugget, and thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you. That's really helpful to hear. I'm glad it worked, and I'm glad you were able to come back as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sharon, did you want to add anything, or are you nice and hopefully blissfully chill?
No, I probably just think Jackie just summed it up really well. Yeah. I think Jackie said something that resonated with me about being maybe in a job where we need to constantly check our use of language and keep everything, what's the word, controlled, and make sure you don't upset or offend anybody, and it's sometimes that's quite tiring. So I think what Jackie said, it's just nice to be able to come away from that and tune into how you really feel and focus on something positive as well, and just get back in touch with those little things.
Yeah. And I think that was, from my perspective, I think that's when I started to have the real breakthroughs of, you know, I often use this term about rules of the fools, was this little phrase that I called, but I realized how much of my life was constrained, if you like, by what I thought I should, you know, like what I've been trained to do, what educated to do, or brought up to do and think, and trying to think my way out of things, especially when you like language. You know, your brain defaults to words, but words are such blunt instruments.
Yeah.
You know, you try and describe a feeling with words. It's like, okay, where do I start with that then? And so that was the breakthrough. Was when I let go and go, you know, I can't work this out. I don't know how to do this. And just went back to just go with feelings. Like my knitting class that I think I talked about on the webinar was just about that. It was just like, I don't have to think about this because I don't know how this works. There's no purpose, there's no intention. It's just, oh, I'll be knitting, I'm drinking tea, having tea. And I think that's, I'm really, really glad that's going to help you, because, I'm going to have a little moment of celebration.
I think you're right in terms of the amount of times during the week I must almost put a lid on the words I really want to say versus the words that come out of my mouth, and actually where that actually is going, because it's got to go somewhere, hasn't it? The fact that I actually want to say, you beat idiot, why did you do it that way? And, you know, how many times have I got to show you how to do it this way? Amongst many other things. It does add stress to us, doesn't it? It does, because internalizing that frustration, and actually, you know, they're very, very calm and collected, and they get a very different response. But yeah, it's got to go somewhere, isn't it? It goes up.
Yeah, and that's why I emphasise. I don't know if it was a bit that you thought or not, where I emphasise the thoughts and things, because exactly the way you just described, those thoughts have gone somewhere. They went in that. I don't know if you saw my bucket. They went in that bucket. Oh, thoughts. They're in the bucket. And that doesn't matter if the rest of life is all like smooth sailing swans on the lake. But it isn't.
Well, from that, yes.
Yeah, right. We're bobbing up and down on the stormy sea of life. So I'm delighted that it's proved helpful, and I think after the last session, I'll probably do this each week now. I kind of thought I would do this at the beginning and then I changed, but I hope that you found this helpful. If we do one session where it's a bit more conversational, we just kind of chat, and we do a session, and then Fridays will be, you know, I do a little bit of training around a specific topic, and it's a little more structured, perhaps. Does that sound like that would work for each of you?
Yeah, that's good.
That's good.
Yeah, sounds great.
Good. And I'm going to stick with Zoom. I did contemplate putting this back into Facebook Live, you know, because then I'm just kind of delivering stuff and you can comment or whatever. But I think Zoom is still better because we do have the options for chat. And I think it's nice to have that little bit of, just a little bit more interaction. It doesn't have to be huge, but it just feels like this is slightly better for that purpose. So, but for each of you, don't ever feel compelled to have your images up. And you can even change your names. You don't even want your names on here. There is a facility in Zoom to call yourself menopausal woman, if you like, or angry wife.
No. Well, yeah.
That'll be going against everything you've just told us, though.
Yes, you're right. Oh, just
well spotted. Well spotted.
Yes, indeed.
But I have a positive name.
Yeah. Black mark for me. Right. Well, have a brilliant weekend, all of you.
And you.
And you.
Yes. And you.
Everybody there.
Yeah, and just enjoy the weekend, and we'll pick up again on Tuesday with your little just post. I'll remind you, don't worry. But posting on the website, and look forward to it.
Lovely.
Okay.
Well,
Thanks very much.
Have a lovely weekend, everyone.
And you. And all of you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.